Before the residency began, we asked our writers to give their thoughts to a number of topics, and so that we could start a discussion here while they're in Iowa City. This week's topic is Nature on Edge. The prompt that we gave them was, nature, the great outdoors, was among the few safe spaces during the pandemic. At the same time, we are inundated about news of the imminent collapse of the natural world. We asked, are plants, animals, storms, heat, dust present in your writing? What description of nature has left a special mark on you? As usual, I will introduce all the panelists briefly, and then they will present their papers, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. I'll introduce them left to right as you face them. I think that's right. Khadija BAJABER is a Mombasa-born poet and fiction writer who also has a degree in journalism. She is a Kenyan of Hadrami descent and who has spent some of her time as a writer documenting the ill-documented Hadrami diaspora. Her debut novel, House of Rust, was selected for the inaugural edition of the Grey Wolf Press Africa Prize and was published here in 2021. Ms. Bajaber's work has appeared also in A Longhouse, Lolway, and Downriver Road, among others. She participates in the spring residency courtesy of an endowment to the Paul and Hualeng Nye Engel Fund. Next to her is Abdelaziz ERRACHIDI from Morocco. He's a professor of Arabic literature at Ibn Tufayl University in Kenitra and the director of the publishing house Al-Kasaba. His novels and story collections include Body of Clouds, Kitchen of Love, Foreigners at My Table, and Childhood of a Frog. He is the recipient of many awards, including the Al-Sharjah Arabic Novel Prize and the Ibn Battuta Prize for his 2014 travel book, Sinbad of the Sahara. He joins us courtesy of funding from the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. State Department. Beside Aziz is T.J. Benson, a Nigerian writer and visual artist whose work explores the body in the context of memory, migration, utopia, and the unconscious self. And those of you who are lucky enough to see last night's performance of Resistance Revolution will have gotten a very immediate sense of that. His work has been exhibited and published in several journals like Harvard's Transition Magazine, Gelada Africa, and Catapult, and his collection of short stories, We Won't Fade into Darkness, was shortlisted for the Saraba Manuscript Prize. He comes to us courtesy of a grant from the U.S. Embassy in Abuja. The fourth panelist, Silvia HOSSEINI, who is based in Tampere, Finland, is a teacher, literary critic, media commentator, and the author of 2 essay collections, In Praise of Dust, which was 2018, and The Way, the Truth, and Death, which came out in 2021. Some themes in her work include travel, corporeality, history, and popular culture. HOSSEINI was awarded the Kalevi Janti Prize and has been nominated for both the Helsingin Sanomat Literature Prize and one that's going to defeat me, Toisinkonen.
Toisinkonen, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. She participates courtesy of an anonymous gift to the International Writing Program. Please welcome our panelists.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to talk about nature and consciousness. The Persian philosopher and poet Afdal ad-Din Kashani linked existence with awareness. He says, the seed of existence is awareness, and its fruit is also awareness. I love thunderstorms very much. I was greeted by one on my way here. Don't you feel as though the hand of God was hovering over our heads? That sounds frightening, but it does not frighten. How wonderful that loud sound. Even the absence of rains feels significant. At night, the air is so hot and still, the trees break off their own arms, dried palm fronds breaking, those heavy hands tearing themselves like a woman cuts off her own hair. Writing nature is often about setting the atmosphere or mood. Menacing atmosphere can be invoked by writing a cold wind a certain way. The attribution of human feelings and responses to inanimate things or animals, or essentially what is not recognized as human in the first place, is the device known as pathetic fallacy. It is very natural that a sea should be conscious, or that crows speak to one another. I consider it pitiable to imagine that a mountain is not as conscious of me as I am of it. We personify nature in writing, but a rational society does not accept that a mountain truly has a soul beyond poetic expression. My own identity and culture affect my philosophies and my writing. A distinct Muslim spirituality must be part of any conversation around my work, or at least around the House of Rust. Nature and knowledge go hand in hand in the themes of my work. When I write and talk about nature, I am writing about existence, consciousness, and ultimately self-knowledge. Nature is not dead matter. It is objective, it is conscious. Every grain of sand, every green thing, all phenomena exist to worship God. Every big or small thing in nature, observable and hidden to the eye, has full knowledge that it is a creation by a creator. In my book, when Aisha finds the unlucky sailboat, she pats its side and says that they will make their own fortune together. I think that even though nature and the inanimate cannot often speak back to us, we care for them as conscious and thus living beings. It is the Islamic belief that one day these things will have tongues to speak and will testify on our good deeds and misdeeds and will bear witness for us or against us for the ways in which we treated them on this earth and this earth. They are united in the level of them being subjects of God's, of knowledge of the Creator. So Aisha's dealings with all she owns have in them a sort of care and consciousness, a sense of duty and a sense of unity. She does not ask anything of the sailboat. She merely states an intention to honor it as much as she can. Speaking to that, nature points towards God and is the phenomenon through which we recognize and deepen our understanding of God, as it indicates that the creation is proof of the Creator. Nature is the signifier rather than the incidental. The preservation of nature, the study of it, and the appreciation of its symbols are acts of worship. Writing nature with works like the House of Rust, which has such a deep Muslim identity, the depictions of nature cannot simply be an exercise of imagination, but an exercise of faith. Muhammad Rasson, a professor of Islamic thought at Carleton University, puts it best in his article about the great chain of consciousness, from which I got the first quotation and learned about the philosopher. His article is called Do All Things Possess Awareness? It was published by Renovatio, the Journal of Zaytuna College. He says, the fundamental insights to be drawn from the great chain of consciousness can help us solve a number of pressing contemporary problems. For example, we can engage the environmental crisis and go beyond the usual legal, economic, and social spheres. We can understand people as conscious beings who are encouraged to protect other conscious beings placed in their trust. If, for example, we believe a tree has consciousness, not just biological life, and that it participates in the same awareness, being, life, and consciousness as humans, we would likely feel more responsible about our custodianship over it. For a long time, the idea of consciousness and the inanimate having awareness of God and of me terrified me. But what this understanding of nature meant was that I could not think of my actions as insignificant or hopeless. Nature's consciousness reaffirms all of existence, roots me to myself. No matter how heavy the weight of this self was, nature neither formed nor held me. It did not show me who I was. It did not forgive me. It did not extend to me opinions or arguments, nor did I expect it to. The knowledge we have is so minimal, and there is so much we must accept that we cannot understand. We have to understand what we can of ourselves, that the thunderstorm, the duty of care, the enormity of God, these things that can sound so frightening need not always frighten, that in fact they encourage in the heart great love. Here the reminder of several existences and the knowledge of my existence and thus the knowledge of my purpose. The seed of existence is awareness, and its fruit is also awareness.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, International Writing Program. Thank you all for coming. My paper is about desert. Writing desert. The desert is the void. It is eternal space and time. In the Arabic dictionary, you can find more than 20 synonyms for the word desert. Some of them mean wilderness, dust, wild, emptiness, and nothingness. And most others denote loneliness, death, and ruin. The first place created in the desert where all the prophets lived. Adam descended from heaven to the desert. Abraham and his children, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, all live in the desert. Moses spoke with God in the desert, and Muhammad carried his message deep into the Arabic desert. Arabic literature started with poetry, which was the basis of the first stages of Arabic writing, the pre-Islamist era. The poet is that era described the emptiness of the desert, its animals, people, their relationship, nomadism, plants, fluctuation in the weather, wind, and harsh climate. Year after year, the desert penetrated the heart of what was written in poetry and prose. Charles Greville says that the space is the novelist who writes the story, even before the author's hand writes it. And space is a product of the narration and in turn contribute to the creation of the narration. Mikhail Bakhtin also confirmed that the chronotype, where space and time come together, is presented in languages and discourse and hold the spirit of the text. In Arabic writing, the desert is the source of sounds, words, and ideas. Writing novels or poetry is writing desert, directly or indirectly. No matter what you write, desert can be hidden within the lines, and its soul takes over the text. Writing desert brings forth in mythologies, mystical radiance, and its presence within Bedouin values and the individual's relationship with the tribe. Based on that, desert can be written on two ways, directly through a specific experience called the novel of the desert in the Arabic world, as mentioned by Ibrahim al-Kawni, Abdurrahman Munif, Miral al-Tahawi, Raja Alim, and others in their writing. Their works give us a glimpse of the sand, the dunes, the camels, of Bedouin values, and the desert authentic climate. In addition to the influential tribal factor in the narration, this direct experience gives shape to the fantastic stories of the Bedouin and the desert mystical features. The events become the place, as Abdurrahman Munif put in the introduction of one of his novels, Ardu al-Sawad. The second, or no desert, wise of writing is where the writer writes about another subject or space, such as the city or the sea. But the writing still appears to be filled with desert. The desert appears to be deeply ingrained in the languages of this writing through emotions and the things ensued. The desert in Arabic writing is the chronotype. So, in the Sahara, I lived with silence. I gradually learned that silence had a certain sound, and I got connected with that sound. I started getting used to hearing desert sound that became an inner image. This image, when nourished by imagination and then put on paper, became writing. The silence in my childhood was huge, and the images were small because creatures in this vast environment are small. Different images come to my mind, especially when the place I visit is different from my narrative one. That's why I dig deep into the details. I delve into every small difference between the creatures of the desert and focus on each word uttered by a Bedouin. To me, their word seems loaded with the depth imposed by the purity and richness of the desert. I have lived where two worlds converged. On the one hand, the world of the oases, where the relationship between farmers, the land, and water are organized. And on the other hand, the wide world of the desert, where many nomads live by moving and making adventure. Between the world of the oases and the desert, and between their inhabitants, relationship has lasted for centuries. The inhabitants on the oases tied their lives to agriculture and land, and they built up their mythology, dreams, and wedding, and ceremonies accordingly. When the desert became arid, the nomads attacked the oases, took their wealth, and kidnapped their women. That is how legends are born. In my novel Bedouin on the Edge, I try to reflect the ambiguous relationship between desert and oasis inhabitant through stories about the struggle for life. The desert inhabits me then, and it inhabits many writers. And I believe that it will relive its secret to me one day, because I am the desert, with all its vigor, strength, impulse, and caution. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. And thanks to the program. I've had a wonderful time so far. The title of my piece is Alone in the Trees. On an errand as a little boy, I stumbled upon a 5-petaled flower beside the street, which my 7-year-old mind believed to be the remnants of a shooting star. I picked it up, and it was soft to touch, but it felt out of this world somehow. And I felt marked, chosen for something special. That would be the beginning of my warped way of perceiving life, which I would later encounter in my prose as magical realism. There are other encounters with nature in my life that would be viewed as supernatural, like my mother believing the half-dozen wild cats that climbed my bedroom window to keep vigilance over me through the night to be witches. But one lasting magical nature has had on me was the mysterious sensation of being protected by it, being carried in it. Growing up in the 90s, I was somewhat shielded from the horrors of military regimes and coups, even though I was raised in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, because my father would rather switch off the news and take me outside to the garden. That of course, didn't mean he didn't have hushed conversations with friends in the evenings, like civil servants across the country back then. This time spent in nature wasn't a denial of reality. When I lost my parents, the first place I was taken to was my father's village. During the months I spent there, I would follow relatives away from human settlements and markets into the forest to farms. What I had felt earlier as a child, gardening with my father, was suddenly magnified into acres and acres of as far as my eyes could see. And it kept wanting to come back. And I kept wanting to come back. It wasn't like the horrors I had faced post my parents' death disappeared in the forest, but it ceased to matter so much when I was surrounded by the whistles of birds, the cicadas of insects, the sweet croaking of brooks, the almost perpetual petrichor mixed with the scent of strange flowers and leaves, the communion of trees. How could I feel alone? It was too easy to leave my grief in the city. This feeling is the most supernatural experience I have had, and I continue to have. I now prescribe spending time in nature in all its forms for whatever ailments I have, not because it can cure or make the pain disappear, but it can use it. It can transform that emptiness into something. And this healing is more real to me than any miracle, the closest I have come to experiencing God. My tribes people used to spend so much of their time in the forest, and scientists are beginning to catch up with the importance of this. Forest bathing, it is now called. Other forms of nature have also been made available to me. I have made it a practice to always look for the nearest body of water so I can empty the grief and longing bottled in my body for so long into the sea. When I would wake frantic into those long insomnia nights of the 2020 lockdown, I would be immediately soothed by the cawing of birds, the rustle of palm leaves swaying outside my window, and the meowing of a wild cat. Sorry, Mom. The miracle of nature, its secret, is the promise of abundance, the real physical emphasis that we are not alone. We are never empty. It is a perfect antidote to the writer's block for me, because when I surrender my empty mind or atrophied thoughts to it, I immediately reconnect. I thought I was a shy person who failed a lot until I started reconnecting to nature in my adulthood. Animals in the first neighborhood I lived in, I lived alone in, liked me for some reason, not just cats, but the bat that somehow found its way in, and the duck that somehow sneaked into my bedroom to lay eggs in my wardrobe and squawked violently each time I tried to pick an outfit, or the scorpion that crawled into my bedroom while I was having a video call with a girl I liked on Valentine's Day. Being in nature reminds us that if a plot or a life doesn't go the way we intend, it doesn't mean there is no order in the world. We are never alone. Forests have gone beyond what Darwinists assume. Newer scientists have found that trees don't outcompete each other for survival. Rather, they grow in harmony and surrender themselves to nurture and the development of younger trees. I used to be shy when presenting my work in class or sharing my ideas with people because I was seeking validation and submitting myself to be measured. These days, I work till I reach a level of quality, then I share with people instead of asking for their measure. Today, I stand or sit in the abundance of all the nature I've connected with and we connect to share what I have learned with you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me and thanks for being here. My paper is called The Complexity of the Nexus. Am I too close to the microphone? All right. In southwest Algeria, the Sahrawi people live in exile. They are not driven away from their homeland because they don't have one. Rather, they are forced out of the land that is their home, the white desert of Sahara. These inhabitants of the desert, which is the literal translation for Sahrawi, are no longer able to practice their traditional nomadic lifestyle. They have become inhabitants of a refugee camp. Meanwhile, the capital of Finland, the land of somewhat plenty, is sweltering. It is summer 2021. Not being used to the heat, the Helsinkians gather at the beaches to seek relief from the sea breeze. As much as they would love to swim, they are driven to the land by the toxic blue-green algae that bloom in the Baltic Sea. Sahara, Helsinki. One would think that there is no connection between these two places, so different in their geography, nature, and culture. But of course there is, and not just one created in the essayist's imagination, known for its ability to interweave faraway things and ideas with invisible threads. The connection is real. The Sahrawi are forced to settle down as their nomadic routes are cut by phosphate mines, violently protected by the Moroccan military forces. In Finland, the same phosphate is used as fertilizer in agriculture, and via surface runoff, groundwater flow, and river flow, it enters the Baltic Sea and disturbs the water ecosystem. The problem is not just Finland, obviously, as there is no justness, or indeed justness in the global world. Phosphate fertilizers are the key element in modern food production. The desert feeds everyone. Alex Kasprak writes in The Atlantic that a dispute over Western Sahara's phosphate reserves could disrupt food production around the globe. Everything is interconnected. Half the globe vibrates the moment we start our morning, says Finnish theologian Mikko Kurenlahti. Certainly, the capitalist system does its best to fade out and hide these interconnections. Its most genius hoax is shifting the responsibility to consumers. If people want ethical products, the market will offer them. On the basis of supply, it could be concluded that most consumers desire specifically junk made by Bangladeshi child slaves. The truth is that an individual consumer or a citizen, if we want to avoid a dirty word, is offered mostly irresponsible choices. But that's not the real problem. The problem is that we are dependent on a system in which unethical production of food, goods, and energy is legal and very profitable. So when the Finnish author and journalist Riikka Suominen claims that literature has failed to explain the climate crisis and failed to open our minds to new scenarios of change, I am baffled. I'm also baffled when the Indian author Amitav Ghosh writes that the climate crisis is also the crisis of imagination. his imagination for sure. For him, the problem seems to be that tornadoes in novels don't make convincing plot twists. On these panels, we have heard many strong arguments defending artistic freedom and equally good arguments reminding of the artist's responsibilities. I don't think you need yet another opinion saying what writers should or should not do. What I am saying is that by focusing on the artist's imagination in tackling the climate and environmental crisis, we are behaving as if we didn't have a solution. As if we didn't know that what needs to be done is to cut down the fossil emissions, sequester carbon, invest in renewable energy and green infrastructure, tax companies that pollute, enact laws that prohibit producing irresponsible products, etc. I'm saying it's the fossil fuel companies and politicians who have failed to open their minds to new scenarios of change. I don't believe it's the writer's job to make the world a better place. I think it's their job to make it either more interesting or more understandable. In both cases, it's not about making things simpler to give answers, but rather presenting the world, nature, and human nature in its formidable complexity. What literature or other art could do, I'm not saying they should, is to make the imperceptible connections visible. The Sahrawi people and the citizens of the Baltic Sea region share the same problem, even though the consequences are very different. This nexus between two distant and dissimilar environments was made observable by two artists, Pekka Niskanen, a Finn, and Mohammed Sleiman Lavat, a Sahrawi. The artwork I have referred to is aptly named Phosphate. What a writer can do especially is to dive into the ambiguousness of language we use to represent nature. I give you an example. The Finnish expression for a body of water is vesistö. It is composed of the word vesi, water, and a suffix, stö, that indicates a place or a collection of things. Suffixes sto and stö connote something that is organized, as they are used in words like kirjasto, arkisto, tiedosto, laivasto, varasto, a library, an archive, a file, a navy, and a warehouse. Although I love my mother tongue, I prefer the English expression. The Baltic Sea could and should be put back to order, but it's not something that can be organized or filed, let alone stored. It is indeed a body. It's alive, a physical, sensuous whole, formed of interdependent, even symbiotic organs or organisms. My body is bound to the body of the sea. It is bound to earth, and to earth it shall return. My body is bound to the bodies of other people and to every other living thing on this planet. The system we share is complex, enigmatic, and fragile.
Thank you all so much. For those who are watching from home, these panel papers will be available on the International Writing Program's website later today. If not, we're getting a nod. We're going to go with later today. And so, yeah, you can catch up and see some of the references. Some of the works were footnoted, and you'll be able to click on some of the links there. We're going to open it up to Q&A, and if there are immediate questions, I mean, TJ is unfortunately up here. He's usually the first question out there. So somebody's ready to jump in, ready to jump into the gap. Yeah. Well, I will get the ball rolling, or try to. At the in Silvia's paper at the end, we were getting a little more about how language itself is what writers work with, and how writers can approach some of these problems or can't approach some of these problems. And all of the papers seem to turn on a few key words. Sometimes they were highlighted or put in italics or in quotation marks. So a sense of the tension in language and how the way language itself is part of what you have to work with to bring nature into your writing or to create the connections for the readers. I wondered if any of the other writers on the panelists wanted to talk about specific ways that language itself is something that they struggle with, or something that they feel that they need to change or bring new awareness of, to use Khadija's word at the beginning. Does that make sense as a question? Whether there's specific words or specific sentences that specific kinds of language that you feel you need to get the reader to think differently about?
Wait, are you guys looking for me, or is there a specific word? Maybe I don't know that you're asking, but or someone else's paper. So the word I used in the beginning.
I was thinking, I mean, for me, words like garden and nature, it was interesting to see that nature got put in quotes by several of you, as though there's a way in which you understand that nature is your own particular understanding of the word, and how, as a writer, or desert for Aziz, that your understanding of desert is, you already understand, is completely different than your audience's understanding of desert, and you were trying to expand what desert means for us. Is that a daily struggle as a writer to think about how language, is there ways in which you're using language to expand what your readers understand about nature? And does anybody else have a question?
Actually, I think I can answer to that. I mean, I already gave you an example, but I think that the whole, like, the word nature in itself is problematic, because it's a way of like separating us from something, and that's like the first thing that we're like we go wrong. Because we are part of it, so I think we should like discover a new word that is like has the same meaning that nature, but includes us.
Yeah. I think for me it was when I started writing this piece, I was thinking about supernatural versus nature, because I find a lot of nature is actually supernatural to the everyday understanding, or to people who live in urban centers. When you go to the rural areas and you see, certain growth formations, or they might seem mysterious to you, but the people who live there are sort of, in quote, used to it. So nature to who becomes the question. What is natural to who? And that's something I have been interrogating. First of all, you're not on social media, but I retweet everything that you said in your piece. I feel giving writers the, something that we can do. I feel like if we can change the way we might respond to, people might respond to language in a way that they might not respond to, force. So I think if our work can be trying to get people to think about new ways to represent language. So for me, my work, it's more of trying to demystify what is, in quotes, natural, especially when it comes to things from even what is a natural gender or a natural sexuality, especially in my African community. Yeah, I'm very interested. And when we say nature, we expect order, in quotes, what we see as order. But nature is also very violent. Nature is also very, eruptions, volcanoes. That is also, tornadoes. All of this is also part of nature. And I was listening to this podcast where somebody from New Orleans, they had this hurricane or so some years back. And apparently they've been having hurricanes for a long period of time. Very dangerous storms. But it's natural to them, so they would gather together while the storm is raging, and outside they are telling stories to themselves, they are cooking. It's almost like a storm party. And I was curious about that. So yeah, the question is natural to who? For me,
the first word I put in the paper is nature, and I tell myself is identity, which means I spoke to myself about nature as identity, which means my nature of writing, nature of words, and after that, when I realized that nature is other thing, I passed to the desert. for my writing, I tried in my paper to to make the idea that my nature is desert. Languages of Arabic languages is make a writer write about deserts, maybe if he want or not, because writing desert is directly by a writing of Bedouin people in the desert, camels, nature in the desert. But on the other hand, you can write about desert. If you don't write about desert, you write about it, like you write about sea in Morocco. You have a novel in Morocco about sea, about other subjects, but deeply you write about desert. That's what I try to say. Yeah.
I have a question. So I'm going to give some unpopular opinion, so I'm sorry. Usually I'm kind of bored when I hear about like novels that talk about nature, because I feel there are mostly two kinds of novels. First, the novel when you have a character that lost himself in nature, like for 200 pages, and it's the kind of like his inner journey and kind of like self-growth journey, etc. And I know it's not all like that, but I'm being caricatural, it's on purpose. And the second, we're seeing a lot in the last few years, I mean, at least in France, is a lot of like eco-anxiety novels, like in Paris it's 40 degrees and we are all going to die because of climate change. 3 people trying to survive. And it makes actually young people very, very anxious. And in my company, I work with young people, and actually I recently realized how much they are really desperate about that. Like, for instance, they think, oh, why having kids? Or why trying to develop a career or whatever? Because in the end, we're just like contributing to a capitalist model going to kill us all. So as a writer, I really like ask myself, what's the role? What's the role of literature? I think you have all answered a bit to that, and especially Silvia in the last paper. But it's really like, I mean, beyond being like very political and being kind of like ecological novel, whatever, what can literature and writers do in that situation of like urgency?
Okay, I'm not going to answer Walid's question entirely, but I'm hoping to kind of add to it. I was throughout, as you were, throughout the 4 papers, I was thinking about the fact that there is now, and I know somebody will be able to help me out here within seconds, there are now attempts in the legal system to give legal standing to both natural objects and animals. So a lake can have, there is an effort to write laws so that a lake can have the right to self-perpetuation, and that, of course, animals can have right to a certain form of protection. So in a way, it's an extension of Walid's question. I mean, one of the things I think literature did, not only can do, but did, was precisely to imbue, I mean, since Romanticism, to imbue, impersonate, give personality to create nature as a entity that has identity, perhaps expanding the kind of point that Khadija was trying to make. That made it possible to start writing laws that. But then the open question is, what happens when an owl has an equal right to you in front of the law as you do? And that's been a source of many great conflicts in the United States. I mean, the spotted owl that displaces entire communities of loggers, etc. Of course, we think rightly, but I think that that's the connection, that the spotted owl has been given an identity that comes from imagination.
Well, I would say maybe come to African communities and study how, because we've had, in so many communities, these entities have what you would call legal standing in courts. We have species of snakes that you don't kill in my tribe, for example. And it seems, I mean, yes, there are traditional, in some cases, spiritual, connotations given to these things. But when scientists are able to study, they begin to say, okay, maybe there's a link between the ecosystem and, these people are saying there's a supernatural aspect to it, but maybe there's another reason. And, people have lived in this way so it's not, I understand how it's sort of like to me, it's more of a return. If that's happening here, then that's amazing. So I feel like maybe coming back to study how other communities have been able to coexist respectfully with these, in quotes, inanimate aspects of life can be a way to learn. The anxiety, everything ultimately is going to become political. So I think any anxiety about it is just, if I'm to Walid's question in terms of say maybe writers shouldn't give people anxiety, my novel that is going to be out in some months, it touches a little bit on the desertification of northern Nigeria and the impact that has had. And when I live, close to the region, but when I go to talk to people in the community there, they don't feel, oh, I'm gaslighting them. They're like, oh, wow, you're actually seeing what's happening to us. They don't feel, so the question is it true that capitalism is not what is the truth, first of all? And yes, of course, I think it's becoming a genre that is marketable in certain spheres, that's for sure. But I don't know, I think writers are interested in truth telling, so they should be. So for me, the question is it the truth, first of all? Whether it's causing anxiety or whatever, what is true and what is untrue. But that's really amazing. I'm going to read about that, the idea of a lake having the right to perpetuate itself. In Kenya, there's this amazing woman. She won the Nobel Prize for when they came to her community, missionaries came to the community, in early, hundreds of years ago, to cut down certain species of trees. She warned, her people warned them that this is a very sacred tree, is important, but like the missionaries were like, no, this is demonic. This is not God. Come and worship God in the church. And they cut down those trees. And what happened was, immediately those trees were cut down, entire ecosystems were destroyed. There was rapid desertification. Streams were lost. Animals died. Like it happened in a very short period. It also affected gender relations between men and women, to the point that domestic violence, poverty, all of that. So some of these things may seem trivial to the outsiders, but if we take time to study and learn, we'll know why it's important. So, yeah.
I'd like to ask Khadija if there are works that you have read that you like for the way they animate the inanimate or give consciousness to the inanimate or to nature. It seemed to be a direction that your own work wants to go in. Are there works of fiction or poetry that you turn to as good examples?
I'd have to think about it more. I have very poor recall when it comes to remembering what I've read so specifically. But I will say the Holy Quran. That is very much my Islamic beliefs and Islamic way I was brought up, and also very much informed my understanding of nature or my understanding of consciousness, which I think the things are very much linked. I remember I had an ustad, or religious teacher, who used to teach me, about religion and, prayers and everything. And he told me the story as a very young child, and kind of freaked me out a bit. He said, when you die, if you've been a good person and you've been performing your prayers, and you're in the grave, the earth will squeeze you very hard, like hugging you and embrace, your ribs will crack. And I was like, okay, that is frightening.
Yeah, that was the good news. What's the bad news?
Yeah, the bad news, if you were a bad person and you mistreated the earth, basically, the earth would squeeze you. It would squeeze you once, like if you're a good person. If you're a bad person, it would squeeze you hard. It's literally called the squeeze. Like, it would choke you until like the day of judgment. So initially, that idea, trying to compute that, was very, very hard for me initially as a child, because of the great sense of responsibility I felt. So then I grew older and kind of digested that more, and I realized what this kind of thinking, if I believe that the nature around me is conscious and that it belongs to something greater than myself, and it knows what I do and how I behave towards it, I feel more conscious and more responsible in my actions towards it. It means that if I'm more considerate of the world around me. I don't waste water when I go to wash my face, and when I go to, I don't litter. Not because I'm trying to actively save the environment. It is, I guess, in believing the dignity of all things, I suppose. As small and as ridiculous as it might sound to, like, you know, the rational world, or the popularly rational world. But yeah, that encouraged in my conduct, in my daily conduct, a certain kind of consciousness of the things around me, which led to good habits, I think. And it ultimately, all you can do in this world is just try to do your best and try to maintain your dignity, the dignity of all the things around you. And so we didn't call it nature conservation back then. We have rules for war, we have rules for planting, we have rules for everything. You don't just cut trees. It's not allowed. According to Islamic jurisprudence, you should have a reason for whatever urban planning you're doing and stuff like that. But yeah, that is the long answer.
I want to go back to Natasha's question. I think that we can call the dignity of animals or the legal status of animals has been discussed a lot in post-humanist philosophy. But the problem, like, if I think from the perspective of everyday life, is that I think that people are probably they don't have anything against the idea of animals having rights, or an owl being like a legal thing or whatever. But the problem is that it's more difficult for people to see the dignity, for example, of animals in mass food production, in mass meat production, because that's something that benefits us, and that's also something that I discussed in my text, that we don't see the production, we don't see what is happening, so that is being cut from us. We don't have the connection to earth, we don't have the connection to animals. So thinking of an owl in a forest is like a romantic idea. Okay, well, it's to us the owl seems like a person, with some kind of personality. We can think about it that way. But to think about a cow or a pig, in a mass meat production facility, that's not it's more difficult to understand the idea of an individual personality, even though the animals have the same person. I mean, they are individuals, but it's more difficult for us to imagine because we don't. It's because of the disconnection.
Children's literature can do a lot.
Yeah.
I have a question for TJ. Since you came to Iowa, which animals have followed you home?
The homo sapiens.
Is this on record? I mean, I won't blame Iowa because, it's kind of dead. But also, squirrels, the squirrels we see around, they are really lovely. But the moment you turn to, give them affection, they run away. I don't know why. But yeah, squirrels have been nice.
I don't know the truth of it, but that seems like an incomplete list.
Cats. I'm not seeing any cats here, actually. Nobody has cats. Why? None of the program directors have cats. Yeah. Disappointing. Yeah. Natasha?
I own one, or she owns me.
I'll show you.
Cats and servants.
To continue what Walid was saying, so we have a lot of dystopian novels, cyberpunk, steampunk novels that talk about the end of the world. But there's also a smaller movement called Solarpunk that's like the utopia of what if we actually are able to prevent carbon emissions and all that? What would the world look like if we did that? Do you think that is an interesting way for writers to aspire for a different future? Or do you think the best way to address climate change is through talking about devastation and like the apocalypse of it all? Which one do you think works best?
That's a discussion that has been going on in Finland a lot. Why are everyone writing dystopias? Well, I think that maybe dystopias are not the best way to address, social problems. They might be, but maybe not usually. But I think that that writing utopias is more difficult because you don't have the like the antagonist. So what are you writing about? Because if you want to write a novel, you need a conflict of some kind. So that is more difficult. But I think that's a challenge for writers to write interesting utopias. I mean, that has been done, and it's possible, I guess.
I think we're trying to traumatize ourselves into behaving well. But I would ask, we don't tend to, even in our everyday lives, we don't hold on to joy as much as we hold on to pain. We remember, like, a lot of our evolution has gone in line with fear. Like, not to touch, fire, or like certain things because of the human evolution. I don't know how much of it is wired to pleasure. So I don't know is there anybody here who has like what's your favorite utopian novel, Walid?
Sorry?
Your favorite utopian novel?
If I ever written a novel?
No, if you have one that you like, that you read.
Yeah, actually, I like a lot. Like there is a French writer called Khadija BAJABER. He's like early 20th century, and he writes a lot about actually some dystopian effect. For instance, from one way to another, electricity doesn't work anymore, and so it was the effects. And actually, was a very early thinker on this kind of topic.
Yeah, but utopia, not dystopia.
Utopia.
Charlotte Perkins Gilman's Herland.
Can come out with like a utopian outcome.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I feel like it's been, personally, my work, I'm trying to challenge myself to do more utopia work centered around utopias, but also it's important to realize that we are already in a dystopia on so many levels. I was with some writers, and one of them had talked about how work, which was set where a large percent of the city was in water. And another Nigerian writer there was like, but this is Lagos already. So like, and you have like Margaret Atwood talking about how she took newspaper clippings to her reading, so that in case a man would tell her, oh, but you're just exaggerating, she would read out a news headline that had something she had written about in Handmaid's Tale. So first of all, I feel like there is dystopia on so many levels. It's just a matter of your distance, or people are born into these dystopias and don't know that they are in dystopias. So it's a matter of perspective. That is why it always older people, no offense to older people,
Yeah, but that's really true, because most writers are middle class and they're writing for a bourgeois audience. They don't understand that many people already live in the dystopia. So they don't have the connection to that either.
Sorry, to add on to that, this is a really interesting conversation that was happening online a while ago, which is about how dystopians, people already living in dystopians, and we have this dystopian literature in Western cultures where it's almost like a touristy vibe. Dystopia doesn't exist. Oh, they were talking about specifically quotation, I think, or just to kind of summarize that dystopians don't exist because of the absence of Western institutions, but because of the existence of Western institutions. And the article is called, very aptly named, "Your Apocalypse is Bad and Wrong and I Would Know," by Nicanor Gordon, and it's on Medium. Just Google that. It's a really interesting article. Yeah. Oh yeah, let me do that. Okay.
Actually, I have a small remark about the paper of Silvia. She speaks about Morocco. Did you visit Morocco? Or,
no.
Huh? So how did you take all this idea about this?
From the artwork that I mentioned.
Just in the newspapers?
No, the artwork that I referred to, the phosphate, made by the two artists.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead, Madhu.
I'm trying not to do that, and I'm a cynical and nihilistic person, so
lies.
It's just wrong place to be. But I mean, you said about writers should write truth. What is truth is again such a competing question when we have rivers in the first world where you cannot swim. We are here by taxes paid by capitalistic, who have, yeah, that's how we're here. And to be fair, and so for me, all this, because I also am closely, at least living since the past year, in a sub-Himalayan belt where people build bamboo houses. But unless we take up radically Gandhian ways of making our own things and going around, there's no point wearing Nike shoes and Adidas and talking about all this at times. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, all of us. I mean,
Tom,
right
you
here,
figure, but
right
yeah.
here. I mean, yeah, everything. I think it's just, yeah, I don't know what has to happen for things to change, and or even, you know, veganism would be a fad for me from the capitalistic sense, because they know there's a market. So they are probably catering to it. But because they are not thinking ethics, are they, is my question. It's a question. So because, I mean, we are looking for a good which has been long hanged. Is it true?
Everything around us now comes from plundered nature, from the phones in our pockets to yeah, my sneakers to everything. But the thing is, okay, despite the best efforts of the romantics, that plunder escalated, continued escalating, and still, sorry. So that plunder continues escalating despite the best efforts of writers. And I think in Silvia's thing, she makes a very good point that no matter what lovely poems we compose in this room, unless we get the politicians and the capitalists on board, this is, yeah, we're just singing to each other. But Walid, I'm very happy that your young people are scared, because they should be. They should be anxious. So I think maybe that is the part we can play. Utopia, or like Utopia, I was like struggling. I was trying to think of a Utopia novel, and I could not, apart from a few Star Trek episodes. But the question is, yeah, so maybe what we write can influence the young, get them more scared, and then that generation is going to save us. But I think that's the understanding. I've written a thing about sentient plants in order to terrify 4-year-olds, because hopefully they can get us out of this, because I don't see us doing it.
Just to add on that, I mean, I think it's actually righteous to have people being aware. We were speaking about awareness, and I think Khadija said it beautifully about the sense of awareness and so on. But for me, sometimes there is a confusion between making people aware or anxious about the situation and making them feel helpless and desperate. And so I'm just saying, like, when I watch the news for a political, ecological point of view and so on, some days I'm just like, you know what, anyway, I don't care. Let's leave it this way because it's all going to end. And I think I'm 40, but for the people that are 20 and that have been 2 years, after 2 years of COVID and all the political and ecological stuff happening, it's just some sense of like, oh, we're not going to do anything. So anxiety is good, but then why not, how to not create a sense of despair? That's actually my fear, actually.
Okay, sorry, let me just interrupt. Continue handing over my microphone. What I was saying is, okay, one of the first questions you asked, Walid, was about nature. So I wanted to basically emphasize that I write about nature, but I'm not a nature writer. I don't do nature writing or environmental writing. And at the end of the day, we can talk about, like, making change and stuff, but, like, I think it was James Baldwin who talked about, as a writer, he's a witness more than, and I think all I can do is witness. That's my job. I can't change the world. I participate in society. I have no choice about that. And all I can do is try to shift perspective a bit. And nature is key to my writing, but I'm not exactly, I don't know. Yeah, that is where the sentence ends.
I think I'm with Khadija. What she said, being witness is very good question, very good example to write nature, because you show people how is beautiful the nature and how the nature inside the soul of people. So I'm with her.
Thank you. Since we have increasingly divergent opinions, there's no good place to stop. But And I want you to, I'm just going to give a few quick announcements, and then I want you to thank the panelists again. This evening at 5 o'clock at Shambo House, we have a Shambo House reading featuring Madhu Raghavendra, Walid ERRACHIDI, and Jinnan Lee. I hope you'll join us there. The rain is going to stop. Sunday, Pamela Ron Sanchez will be hosting a screening of Charlie Kaufman's 2008 film, Synecdoche, New York. That'll be at Adler 105 at 6 p.m. Come early, get a seat. Next Tuesday, we're very excited, and this is the announcement more than any other that I really wanted to get out there. At 4:30 at Shambo House, we are going to be celebrating the near 5 decades of service of Peter and Mary Nazareth, who have been involved with the IWP since, we think, 1972. Debates differ, but have been just such a huge part of our lives and this program. And so we hope everybody watching and those coming, those here will join us. That's 4:30 on Tuesday. Thursday evening, we'll be having Global Express, an evening of staged readings of works by the writers. That's in a special location this spring. That's in the IMU Black Box Theater on the 3rd floor of the IMU. Look for the signs. And next week we won't have a panel here, but in 2 weeks we'll be back for Images of America. Please thank our wonderful panelists and the conversation they get going.